The sand stretched endlessly in every direction, shimmering under the brutal August sun of 1882. And Beatrice Sullivan knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here in the Arizona territory, her bones bleaching white among the cacti and tumbleweeds like so many others who had underestimated this merciless land. Her legs trembled with each step, muscles screaming in protest as dehydration and exhaustion took their toll. The wagon train had left her behind 3 days ago when her father succumbed to fever, the other families too frightened of contagion to wait for a young woman to bury her only remaining parent. She had tried to catch up, rationing the meager supplies she could carry, but the desert had swallowed their tracks like they had never existed at all. Beatrice collapsed to her knees, her carpetbag slipping from nerveless fingers. The canteen had been empty since yesterday morning. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue thick in her mouth. She tried to stand, tried to force her body forward one more step, but her limbs refused to obey. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding together in the heat haze. She could not move another inch forward. The sound of hoofbeats registered dimly in her fading consciousness. Hallucination, she thought. Death coming to claim her at last. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by the creak of leather and the snort of a horse. Strong arms lifted her from the scorching sand, and a voice rough as gravel but somehow gentle spoke close to her ear. "I've got you now. Rest." Darkness claimed her before she could see the face of her rescuer. When Beatrice woke, she found herself lying on a bedroll inside a canvas tent, blessed shade protecting her from the sun's assault. A damp cloth rested on her forehead and someone had removed her boots. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back down. "Easy there." The same voice from before, closer now. A man moved into her field of vision, kneeling beside her with a tin cup of water. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting, falling across his forehead. His eyes were an unexpected shade of gray, studying her with concern. "Just sips at first. Your body needs time." She obeyed, grateful beyond words as the water touched her parched lips. It tasted like salvation. After a few careful sips, she found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a rasp. "Thank you. Name's Yates Harrison," he said, setting the cup aside but staying close. "I've got a camp about 2 miles from where I found you. Been tracking a group of wild horses through this territory for the better part of a week. Lucky I came across you when I did. Another few hours." He did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. Beatrice Sullivan. She managed to meet his eyes. "My father and I were with a wagon train heading to California. He took sick with fever. The others were afraid, so they left us. He died 2 days after that. I tried to catch up, but I could not find their trail." Something flickered across Yates's face, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of anger barely contained. "They had no right to abandon you like that. This desert does not forgive, and they knew it. I cannot change what happened." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had cried herself dry over her father's grave, alone in the wilderness. "I just need to figure out where to go from here." Yates studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The nearest town is Prescott, about 40 miles northwest. I was heading there myself once I finish my business with those horses. You are welcome to travel with me if you have nowhere else to go." Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy all over again. "I would be grateful. I have some money saved, not much, but I can pay for passage on a stage once we reach town. We can worry about that later." Yates rose to his feet, moving with an easy grace that spoke of years spent in the saddle. "Right now, you need to rest and get your strength back. I have some jerky and beans. Nothing fancy, but it will help. And plenty of water. My camp is near a spring, one of the few reliable sources in this area. Over the next 3 days, Beatrice slowly recovered under Yates's careful attention. He proved to be an excellent caretaker, patient and practical, never making her feel like a burden despite the fact that she had completely disrupted his plans. He told her about his work as a horse wrangler, how he traveled through the territories catching and breaking wild mustangs to sell to ranchers and the army. It was lonely work, he admitted, but it suited him. He had grown up on a ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 sons, and had struck out on his own at 18 to make his own way in the world. Beatrice, in turn, shared her own story. She had been raised in St. Louis, the only child of a widowed shopkeeper. When her father decided to seek his fortune in California, she had been excited about the adventure, about seeing the vast landscapes she had only read about in books. The reality had been far harsher than her imagination, but she tried not to let bitterness take root. Her father had died believing they were heading toward a better life, and she would honor his memory by making something of herself, somehow. "You are stronger than you think," Yates said one evening as they sat by the campfire, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. "Most people would have given up out there in the desert, but you kept walking, kept fighting, right up until your body gave out. I had no other choice." Beatrice stared into the flames, watching the embers drift upward into the darkness. Giving up meant dying, and I was not ready for that. "There is always a choice." Yates poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "The choice to keep going even when it seems impossible. That takes courage. Real courage, not the kind men brag about in saloons." She looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing past the weathered exterior to the man beneath. He had been kind to her, respectful, never once making her feel unsafe despite the fact that they were alone in the wilderness with no one around for miles. There was a steadiness about him, a quiet strength that had nothing to do with physical prowess and everything to do with character. She found herself wondering what it would be like to know him better, to understand the thoughts behind those gray eyes. The next morning, Yates announced that they would begin the journey to Prescott. The wild horses he had been tracking had moved on, following water sources deeper into the territory, and he could always pick up their trail later. Beatrice rode behind him on his sturdy roan gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. She tried not to notice the solid warmth of his back, the way his muscles shifted beneath his shirt as he guided the horse across the rugged terrain. Tried and failed. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently to rest in whatever shade they could find. Yates kept up a steady conversation, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. He told her about the time he had been chased by a black bear near the Mogollon Rim, and how he had once helped a Navajo family fix their wagon wheel in exchange for the best mutton stew he had ever tasted. His voice was soothing, a pleasant rumble that made the long hours in the saddle pass more easily. On the second day of travel, they encountered a small group of prospectors heading south toward Tombstone, chasing rumors of silver strikes. The men were rough-looking, their eyes calculating as they took in Beatrice's presence. Yates positioned his horse between her and the strangers, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "Afternoon," the leader said, a gap-toothed man with a scraggly beard. "That is a mighty pretty traveling companion you have got there, friend." "My wife and I are heading to Prescott," Yates replied, his tone easy but his eyes hard. "We appreciate you gentlemen being on your way." The lie was so smooth, so natural, that Beatrice almost believed it herself. The prospectors exchanged glances, then shrugged and moved on, clearly not interested in tangling with an armed man protecting his woman. Once they were out of earshot, Beatrice leaned forward slightly. "Your wife," she murmured. "Better they think you are spoken for." Yates kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Lone women in the territories attract the wrong kind of attention. I hope you do not mind the presumption." "I do not mind." And she found, to her surprise, that she truly did not. If anything, the lie had sent a small thrill through her, a wondering what it might be like if it were true. She pushed the thought away, telling herself she was being foolish. Yates Harrison had saved her life and was helping her reach safety. That was all. She should not read more into his kindness than simple human decency. But that night, as they made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods near a creek, she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, busying himself with the horses. Beatrice felt her heart skip in her chest, a sensation both thrilling and terrifying. They reached Prescott on a sweltering afternoon, the town sprawling across Granite Creek with its saloons and shops and territorial governor's mansion. Beatrice had never been so happy to see civilization, even if it was rough around the edges. Yates found them rooms at a respectable boarding house, run by a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Callahan, who looked Beatrice over with sharp eyes before nodding her approval. "I will give you a week to find your feet," Yates said as they stood in the boarding house parlor, suddenly awkward with each other now that their journey had ended. "The room is paid for, and Mrs. Callahan serves 2 meals a day. There are families in town looking for help, governesses and such. With your education, you should be able to find something suitable. You have done so much already." Beatrice felt tears threatening again, but this time she let them come. "I do not know how to repay you. You do not owe me anything." Yates reached out as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it, his hand falling back to his side. "I am just glad I found you when I did. You take care of yourself, Beatrice Sullivan." He turned to leave, and panic surged through her. She caught his arm, her fingers closing around his wrist. "Will I see you again?" Yates looked down at her hand, then back up at her face. Something vulnerable flickered across his features. "I will be in town for a few days, selling some horses I have got stabled at the livery. After that, I am heading north toward the Colorado Territory. But if you need anything at all, you can leave word at the Silver Dollar Saloon. The owner is a friend, and he knows how to reach me." It was not the answer she wanted, but it was more than she had expected. She released his arm, stepping back. "Thank you, Yates, for everything." He nodded once, then left, the door closing softly behind him. Beatrice stood in the empty parlor, feeling suddenly bereft, as if something precious had just slipped through her fingers. Over the next 3 days, Beatrice threw herself into building a new life. She visited every respectable family in Prescott who might need help, presenting herself as an educated young woman of good character who could teach children their letters and numbers. Most turned her away politely, but on the 4th day, she found success with the Whitmore family. Colonel Whitmore was retired Army, with a wife and 3 rambunctious boys ranging from 6 to 11. They offered her room and board plus a small salary to serve as governess and tutor. It was exactly what she needed, a chance to start over. So why did she feel so hollow inside? She saw Yates once during those days from a distance. He was leading a string of horses down the main street, his hat pulled low against the sun. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, and she almost called out. But then a woman stepped out of the general store and touched his arm, smiling up at him. Beatrice felt a sharp stab of something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy and forced herself to turn away. He had his own life, his own path. She could not expect him to linger in Prescott just because she had developed foolish feelings for him. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house, she could not stop thinking about him. The way he had held her so carefully in the desert, like she was something precious. The sound of his voice when he told her stories by the campfire. The concern in his eyes when he made sure she drank enough water, ate enough food. No one had cared for her like that since her father died, and maybe not even then. Her father had loved her, but he had been distracted, focused on his dreams of California gold. Yates had simply been present, attentive, seeing her as she was. She had fallen in love with him. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless. She had fallen in love with Yates Harrison, and in 2 days he would ride out of Prescott and out of her life forever. The next morning, Beatrice made a decision. She could not let him leave without telling him how she felt. It was improper, forward, completely against every rule of courtship she had been raised to follow. But propriety had not saved her in the desert. Courage had. And maybe, just maybe, courage could give her a chance at happiness now. She found him at the livery stable, checking the shoes on his roan. He looked up in surprise when she appeared in the doorway, the morning sun at her back. "Beatrice." He straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Is everything all right? Did something happen?" "Everything is fine." She stepped into the stable, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and horses. "I found a position with a family here in town. I start next week." "That is wonderful news." His smile seemed genuine, but she thought she saw something sad lurking in his eyes. "I knew you would land on your feet." "Yates, I need to tell you something." She moved closer, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I know we have not known each other long, and you have already done so much for me, but I cannot let you leave without being honest about my feelings." He had gone very still, watching her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Beatrice, please let me finish." She took a shaky breath. "When you found me in that desert, you saved more than my life. You gave me hope when I had none. You treated me with kindness and respect when I was at my most vulnerable. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. I understand if you do not feel the same way. Truly, I do. But I had to tell you, because I think I would regret it for the rest of my life if I did not." The silence stretched between them, painful and heavy. Beatrice felt her cheeks burning, mortification washing over her. She had been wrong to assume, wrong to hope. Yates closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and cupped her face in his hands. "Do you mean that?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Because I have been half out of my mind these past few days, trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing. I was going to ride away and try to forget you, because I thought a woman like you deserved better than a drifter who spends his life chasing wild horses across the territories. I do not want better." Beatrice covered his hands with her own, tears streaming down her face now. "I want you, just you." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste peck she had imagined in her girlish daydreams. It was fierce and desperate and full of all the longing they had both been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have much to offer," he said quietly. "No grand house, no fancy lifestyle, just hard work and a lot of traveling. But I swear to you, Beatrice, I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "Then I accept." She laughed through her tears, giddy with relief and joy. "When do we leave?" They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher passing through Prescott. Mrs. Callahan served as witness, along with the proprietor of the Silver Dollar Saloon, a grizzled former cavalry scout named Dutch who slapped Yates on the back and declared himself the best man. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress she had purchased with some of her savings, and Yates presented her with a silver ring he had commissioned from the local silversmith, set with a small turquoise stone. "Found this stone myself, up in the mountains last year," he told her as he slipped it onto her finger. "Been carrying it around, waiting for the right reason to do something with it. Guess I was waiting for you. They spent their wedding night in a real hotel, the finest Prescott had to offer, which still meant thin walls and questionable plumbing, but felt like a palace to Beatrice. Yates was gentle with her, patient, whispering endearments against her skin as he showed her all the ways a man could love a woman. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, the summer heat making the sheets stick to their skin. "Tell me about where we are going," Beatrice said, trailing her fingers across his chest. "I want to know everything." "Well, I have been thinking." Yates caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "The wild horse business is good, but it means a lot of traveling, living rough. That was fine when I was on my own, but now that I have a wife." He paused, seeming almost shy. "There is a valley I know up in Wyoming territory, near a town called Jackson. It is beautiful country with mountains and rivers and enough grass to support a good-sized herd. I have been saving my money for years, and I think I have enough now to buy some land, start a real ranch. We could build a house, raise horses properly instead of just chasing wild ones. Maybe raise a family too, if that is something you want." Beatrice felt warmth bloom in her chest. "That sounds perfect, but are you sure? I do not want you to give up your freedom because of me." "Freedom?" Yates laughed softly. "I have been free my whole adult life, and you know what I learned. Freedom gets lonely. I want to build something that lasts, something real. And I want to build it with you." They left Prescott a week later, Yates having sold off his string of horses and purchased supplies for the long journey north. Beatrice said goodbye to Mrs. Callahan, who pressed a package of biscuits and dried fruit into her hands and told her gruffly to take care of herself. The widow's eyes were suspiciously bright as they parted. The journey to Wyoming took the better part of 2 months. They traveled slowly, following established trails and camping under the stars. Yates taught Beatrice how to handle a rifle, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to tell if water was safe to drink. She proved an apt student, her natural intelligence and determination serving her well. They passed through Colorado, skirting the edges of mining towns and cattle ranches, always pushing north. At night, they made love beneath the vast expanse of sky, learning each other's bodies with increasing confidence and creativity. Yates was playful in bed, quick to laugh and not afraid to be vulnerable. Beatrice discovered a boldness in herself she had not known existed, a willingness to ask for what she wanted and take pleasure in his responses. They talked for hours, sharing dreams and fears and silly stories from their childhoods. She told him about the time she had accidentally set her school dress on fire during a chemistry demonstration, and he told her about the time his brothers had convinced him he could fly if he jumped off the barn roof. They argued sometimes too, but it was never cruel, and they always made up before sleeping. By the time they reached Jackson in late October, the aspens had turned gold and the first snows were dusting the peaks of the Teton Range. The town was small, just a handful of buildings clustered in the valley, but the surrounding land was everything Yates had promised. They filed a homestead claim on 160 acres along the Gros Ventre River, paying the filing fee with money Yates had carefully saved over years of hard work. Their first winter was brutal. They lived in a rough cabin Yates built with logs he cut and hauled himself, chinked with mud and moss. The wind howled down from the mountains, and snow piled so high against the door they sometimes could not leave for days at a time. But they had each other, and a good stock of supplies, and a cast iron stove that kept them warm. Beatrice learned to bake bread and cook venison stew, and Yates kept them supplied with meat from hunting trips into the foothills. They read together from the few books they had brought, and Yates taught her to play poker, which she quickly discovered she was very good at. Spring came late to the high country, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the river ran high with snowmelt. Yates spent his days working on the ranch, building corrals and a barn, clearing land for hay fields. Beatrice planted a vegetable garden and started a small flock of chickens she purchased from a neighboring ranch. She also discovered, with a mixture of joy and terror, that she was pregnant. Yates's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and whooping like a madman, then set her down carefully as if she might break. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "You and me, a baby." Their son was born in February of 1884, during a howling blizzard that kept the midwife from reaching them. Yates delivered the baby himself, his hands shaking but sure, talking Beatrice through the pain with steady encouragement. When he finally placed the squalling infant on her chest, both of them were crying. They named him Thomas, after Beatrice's father. He had Yates's gray eyes and Beatrice's dark hair, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. Life on the ranch was hard work, but it was good. Over the next few years, they built their herd slowly, purchasing horses from other ranchers and breaking them for sale. Yates had a gift with the animals, a patience and understanding that made even the wildest Mustang eventually trust him. Beatrice handled the books and correspondence, managing the business side of things with the education her father had insisted she receive. Together, they made a formidable team. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved following his father around the ranch, chattering in the strange half-language of young children. When he was 3, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her mother's quick mind and her father's easy smile. 2 years after that came another boy, James, who was quiet and thoughtful from the start. The ranch prospered. They added more land to their holdings, built a larger house with real glass windows and a wrap-around porch. Yates hired help during busy seasons, young cowboys looking to learn the trade, and Beatrice became known throughout the valley for her fair dealings and sharp business sense. They were respected members of the community, invited to barn raisings and church socials, their children playing with the other valley kids. But success and family never dimmed the love between Yates and Beatrice. If anything, it deepened, seasoned by shared experiences and the comfort of true partnership. They still found time to steal away together, riding up into the mountains on summer evenings while the older children watched the younger ones, making love in hidden meadows like newlyweds. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing, their conversations as easy as breathing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates gave Beatrice a horse he had been training specifically for her, a beautiful paint mare with a gentle disposition and ground-eating stride. "For the woman who walked through the desert and refused to quit," he said as he helped her into the saddle. "Figure you have earned something faster than your own 2 feet." She named the mare Grace, because Grace was what had brought them together in that brutal Arizona desert all those years ago, and what had carried them through every challenge since. When Thomas turned 16, he announced his intention to join the Army, inspired by stories from Colonel Whitmore's son, who had passed through Jackson on his way to a posting in Montana. Beatrice's heart broke a little at the thought of her firstborn leaving, but Yates reminded her that they had raised their children to be independent, to follow their own paths. They sent Thomas off with their blessing and enough money to buy a good horse when he needed one. Sarah proved to have her mother's love of learning and her father's way with animals. She announced at 14 that she intended to become a veterinarian, a bold ambition for a young woman, but one her parents supported completely. They arranged for her to apprentice with the traveling veterinarian who serviced the valley ranches, and she threw herself into the work with characteristic determination. James, the quiet one, surprised them all by revealing a talent for art. He filled sketch books with drawings of horses and mountains and the play of light on water, creating images so beautiful they made Beatrice cry. Yates built him a studio in the barn loft, and James spent hours there, lost in his own world of creation. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. There were hard times, too. They lost a winter's worth of hay to a barn fire and had to purchase feed at inflated prices to keep their horses alive until spring. A flash flood nearly swept away their house one year, and they spent weeks rebuilding. Yates broke his leg when a spooked horse kicked him, and Beatrice nursed him through weeks of forced inactivity, both of them going half mad with his impatience to heal. But they weathered every storm together, their love a constant in a changing world. Beatrice would sometimes wake in the night and watch Yates sleep beside her, marveling at the path that had brought them here. If her father had not died, if the wagon train had not abandoned her, if Yates had not been tracking those wild horses through the Arizona desert at exactly the right moment, none of this would exist. Their children, their ranch, their life together, all of it hung on a thread of chance and choice. On their 20th anniversary, Yates took Beatrice back to Arizona. It was a sentimental journey, but one they both needed to make. They visited Prescott first, finding the town much changed, larger and more established. Mrs. Callahan had passed away years before, but the boarding house still stood. Then they rode out into the desert, Yates navigating from memory to the place where he had found her all those years ago. It looked different in spring, with the desert briefly green from winter rains and wildflowers blooming between the cacti. But Beatrice recognized it, felt it in her bones, this place where she had given up and been saved. "I was so afraid," she said quietly, standing in the spot where she had collapsed. "I thought I was going to die alone, and no one would ever know what happened to me." Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "But you did not die. You survived and you fought and you built a life most people only dream about. We built it." She turned in his arms to face him. "I could not have done any of it without you. We saved each other." Yates kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips. "I was just as lost as you were. I just did not know it yet. Wandering around with no real purpose, no connection. Then I found you, and everything clicked into place." They made love there in the desert, on a blanket spread over the sand, with the spring sun warm on their skin and the wind whispering through the sage. It felt like closing a circle, honoring the place where their story began. When they returned to Wyoming, Thomas was waiting for them with news. He had been promoted to sergeant and was engaged to be married to a rancher's daughter he had met in Montana. The wedding would be in the fall, and he wanted his parents there. It was a joyous occasion, the whole family traveling to Montana to celebrate. Beatrice watched her son pledge his life to his bride and felt the sweet ache of time passing. Where had the years gone? When had her baby become this tall, confident man in an army uniform? But then Yates took her hand and squeezed gently, and she remembered. The years had gone into building something beautiful, into raising children who were brave and kind and true, into creating a partnership that had weathered every test. She had no regrets. Sarah came home 2 years later with her veterinary certification, and a quiet young man named Daniel who worshipped the ground she walked on. They were married on the ranch, under the cottonwoods by the river, and built a house on the edge of the property. Sarah opened a practice serving the valley ranches, and Daniel managed the business side of things. the two of them falling into partnership as naturally as Beatrice and Yates had. James sold his first painting when he was 23 to an art dealer from Chicago who happened to be vacationing in Jackson. More sales followed, and soon James was making a name for himself as a Western artist. But he never left the ranch for long, always returning to his studio in the barn, saying he needed the mountains and the horses for inspiration. Beatrice turned 50, then 55, her hair graying and lines deepening around her eyes. Yates aged too, his dark hair going silver, his movements a little slower. But his eyes still lit up when he looked at her, and his touch still sent shivers down her spine. They became grandparents and then grandparents again, their home filled with the laughter and chaos of visiting grandchildren. On warm summer evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the Tettons while the grandchildren played in the yard. Yates would pull Beatrice close, and she would rest her head on his shoulder, perfectly content. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not found you that day?" Yates asked once. "No," Beatrice said firmly, "because you did find me. Everything else is just speculation. I am glad I found you." Yates kissed the top of her head. "Best thing I ever did." "Second best," Beatrice corrected with a smile. "The best thing you did was convince me to marry you. Pretty sure that was your idea. Details." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the valley they had made their own. When Yates turned 65, the children threw them a party, inviting half the valley to celebrate. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Thomas came with his wife and 4 children. Sarah and Daniel brought their 3, and James showed up with a pretty schoolteacher he had been courting and finally worked up the courage to propose to. The whole thing was loud and messy and absolutely perfect. At one point, Yates pulled Beatrice onto the makeshift dance floor, spinning her around to a fiddle tune while their family and friends clapped and cheered. She moved in his arms like they had been dancing together for 1,000 years, which in a way they had. Every day of their marriage had been a dance, learning each other's rhythms, adjusting to each other's steps. "I love you," Yates said, his voice just for her beneath the music. "In case I do not say it enough, I love you more than anything in this world. You say it plenty." Beatrice smiled up at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "But I never get tired of hearing it. I love you too, Yates Harrison. I loved you from the moment you picked me up in that desert and told me to rest." "I've got you," Yates said, echoing those long-ago words. "I will always have you." And he did. Through all the years that followed, through the ordinary trials of aging and the extraordinary joy of watching their legacy continue through children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They remained each other's anchor, each other's home. 2 souls that had found each other against impossible odds and held on tight. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Someone had located the circuit preacher who had married them, now ancient and barely able to see, and he renewed their vows in a ceremony that had everyone crying. Beatrice wore a new dress in the same blue as her wedding gown, and Yates had polished his boots until they shone. When the preacher pronounced them still married after all these years, everyone laughed through their tears. That night, alone in the house they had built together, Yates and Beatrice lay in bed and watched the stars through the window. Their bodies had changed over the decades, marked by time and work and the business of living, but Beatrice still felt beautiful when Yates looked at her, and he was still the handsomest man she had ever seen. 50 years, Yates mused. Half a century. How did that happen, one day at a time? Beatrice laced her fingers through his. "Just like everything else we have done. You know what the best part is?" Yates turned to face her, propping himself up on one elbow. I am still not tired of you, still wake up every morning glad you are beside me. Still think you are the smartest, bravest, most beautiful woman in the world. Well, I am definitely the luckiest." Beatrice reached up to trace the lines of his face, memorizing features she had studied for 5 decades. "Lucky that you found me when you did. Lucky that you saw something worth saving in a half-dead woman in the desert. Lucky that you loved me enough to build a life with me." "The luck was all mine," Yates insisted. "You were worth saving 1,000 times over." They made love slowly, tenderly, bodies moving together with the ease of long practice. Afterward, Beatrice dozed with her head on Yates's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the most comforting sound in the world. The ranch continued to thrive under their children's management, though Yates and Beatrice remained actively involved well into their 70s. They scaled back the horse breeding operation, but kept a small herd of their favorites, animals they had raised from foals and could not bear to part with. Grace, Beatrice's paint mare, had long since passed, but her descendants still carried riders across the valley. The house was full of memories, every room holding stories, every piece of furniture worn smooth by years of use and love. They traveled occasionally, visiting their scattered children and grandchildren, but they always came home to Jackson, to the valley that had become the center of their world. This was where they belonged, where they had put down roots so deep nothing could shake them loose. When Yates fell ill at 78, pneumonia settling in his lungs after a wet spring, Beatrice nursed him with the same fierce determination she had brought to every challenge in their life together. She sat by his bedside day and night, forcing broth down his throat and bathing his fevered skin. The children came, gathering like worried birds, but Beatrice sent most of them away. "Your father is too stubborn to die," she told them firmly. "He has more living to do yet," and she was right. Yates rallied after 2 weeks of being sick, coughing his way back to health with Beatrice's hand in his the whole time. When he was finally strong enough to sit up and take real food, he looked at her with infinite gratitude. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. "Again. Of course I did." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "We have a deal, remember? We take care of each other. Always." "Always," Yates agreed. They had 5 more good years together, years of quiet contentment and deep satisfaction. They celebrated Thomas's retirement from the army and the birth of their first great-great-grandchild. They attended James's gallery showing in Denver, where his paintings sold for prices that made Beatrice dizzy. They watched Sarah teach her own daughter the art of veterinary medicine, the knowledge passing down through generations. On a late summer evening in 1934, exactly 52 years after Yates had found Beatrice in the Arizona desert, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The air was sweet with the scent of hay and wildflowers, and the mountains glowed pink in the setting sun. Yates had his arm around Beatrice, and she had her head on his shoulder, perfectly at peace. "I have been thinking," Yates said softly. "If I could go back and live my life over, I would not change a single thing. Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you, and you are worth everything." "Same here," Beatrice said, blinking back tears. "Even the hard parts, even losing my father and nearly dying in the desert, because all of it brought me to this. To you, to our children, to this life we built together. I would not trade it for anything." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched over them in the Arizona desert, that had shone down on their wedding night, that had been witness to every moment of their extraordinary, ordinary life. "I love you, Beatrice Harrison," Yates whispered. "I love you, Yates Harrison," she whispered back. And there, on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the land they had claimed and the legacy they had created. Two souls who had found each other against all odds rested in perfect contentment. Their story had begun with a desperate woman who could not move another inch forward, and a cowboy who picked her up and promised he had her. It had become a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and last beyond a lifetime.